Selamat petang dan salam sejahtera. A very good evening to one and all, everyone who's here today with us for the very first webinar that has been launched by MMA's AI in Healthcare and Digital Health Committee. To tell you all a bit about the AI in Healthcare and Digital Health Committee, it is one of the youngest committees within the MMA. It was formed at the annual general meeting in Kuching just last September, and this is our very first webinar. I am Dr. Sivabala Selvaratnam, obstetrician and gynecologist at Hospital Raja Permaisuri Bainon, Ipoh Perak, and I'm also a committee member of this young committee of ours. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of today's topic, we are really proud of this international collaboration with Lemay.ai, a Canadian AI consultation firm, right? And to tell you more about that, we have none other than Dr. June Lau, the brain, I would say, or the extremely pretty person behind the formation of this committee. Uh, Last year, Dr. June felt that AI is rapidly evolving, and especially so in the healthcare sector. And it was thanks to her vision that she felt that MMA, being the oldest and largest medical organization in the country, we needed to be at the forefront, formulating policies and spearheading this movement. So, without further ado, I'd like our participants today to hear from Dr. June Lau. Dr. June, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silva, for the wonderful introduction. So, good morning, good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you as the, officiating our first webinar for the AI in Healthcare and Digital Health Committee. It's been a journey, and I wouldn't have been here today without the support of this excellent committee, Dr. Siva. A great shout out to Dr. Siva, a great shout out to Dr. Azizan, who's part of the committee, Dr. Gunentira, and Dr. Ong Eng Jo. So just to really keep it really tight, about 5 years ago, I served as SCOMOS chairperson. Maybe some of you have heard of me. I'm currently based in the US right now. I work, with a medical device company, but I believe in, the vision of creating Malaysia as the forefront of the next, I would say, AI powerhouse in Asia. And with all the investments coming in the recent years, I believe we have the capacity and capabilities to do so. So my vision really, and not to expand too far on it, is to create and cultivate the next generation of AI empowered healthcare professionals and to raise our standards up to the standards of the international level. And this is why we focus on 4 pillars: education, partnerships, innovations, and collaboration. Our partnership with and collaboration with Lemay.ai represents that very first, I would say, pillar of what we intend to do in the future. So without further ado, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of Daniel. He will take us through the rest, and he will take all of you through, and Siva will be moderating the session. All right, so just to hear something about my dear friend Daniel. So Daniel Shapiro is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Lemay.ai, an AI consulting firm headquartered in Ottawa, Canada. With a strong track record in innovation, Daniel holds 3 patents and has authored more than 30 peer-reviewed publications. Prior to Lemay.ai, he served as CTO and co-founder for several AI-focused startups, driving advancement in applied machine learning and AI product development. In addition to his industry work, Daniel shares his expertise as a part-time professor at the University of Ottawa, where he teaches computer engineering courses with a focus on applied machine learning. So without further ado, now I will hand the floor to Daniel, and then Dr. Siwa will be taking any questions at the end of the session. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. June. Thank you, Dr. Siva. Welcome, everybody. Got a big crowd here. So what we're going to be talking about today is, as advertised, some continuing medical education on AI applications in healthcare, with a focus on automation, kind of new capabilities, what's possible in the field. And so after some background and definitions, we're not going to turn this into a whole course. We're just going to do some brief review. Many of you have had exposure to what is AI from the media. We're going to talk about different mental models for how to get AI to do things that you want to do, to define your objectives and to accomplish them in the context of this new tool. So you'll see down here, we've got these section pointers to say like which of these 5 sections are we in. We've got 52 slides, so we're going to press on the gas and get moving. So we're going to be looking at AI applications in different areas in clinical practice and hospital administration, patient-centered care, outpatient applications, and also kind of a brief introduction into the ethical and regulatory considerations of adopting AI to do things practical. So a quick bit about me. I've got 4 girls. I've got identical twins, so we're running a little twin study of our own. As you heard from June, I'm a CTO at an AI consulting company. I did my dissertation on an AI topic and got some experience in the medical device industry. I'm now a lead ISO auditor, also a professor at University of Ottawa, and I've actually been to Malaysia, so I have some context within the medical field of what is Malaysia, what does the system look like a little bit. So this is the company that I work at. I've done well over 200 projects. The focus of the company is on applying AI in different fields, medical being one of them. And so there's some of these international partnerships, and that's taken me all over the world to do AI things with my various colleagues. So what I'm hoping you will get out of this webinar is a little bit of awareness about what AI is all about, how can it help in the healthcare field, to help you lay the groundwork for adopting artificial intelligence in your practice, which it's a very diverse group of people here. It's going to be different for everyone, so we're going to try and get in a little bit of goodies for everyone. I also want to encourage you to not fail in this endeavor. And so if you know where the landmines are, you can not step on them. And so there's a bit of that here as well. Also, just checking like what is your readiness so that you know what's the next step. You don't want to jump too far and then find that the resources are not there to get to the end. So we're going to start with a little bit of background material on AI and then go into the more advanced sections of developing AI solutions before pivoting into the applications. This picture is an AI-generated picture, just to give you a sense of where the state of the art is. It's pretty impressive. It looks real. And so what I want you to think about when you're thinking about artificial intelligence, I know it's a scary topic. Everybody's worried it's going to come for their job. Artificial intelligence is the new sewing machine. It used to be you'd do sewing machine by hand, and it was slow. AI, like the sewing machine, is not smart, but it's very strong, and it doesn't get tired. And so AI is part of automation. You can think of the Excel spreadsheet having destroyed many, many careers that were based on graph paper and writing stuff out by hand in the 60s and 70s. We still have an economy post Excel spreadsheets. It's just different. And so it's useful to think about artificial intelligence not as a thinking machine, but instead as an automation tool, as a process automation, workflow automation, and everything automation, which is great. So it's good for what it's good for and not for anything else. It's not a person, it's an approach. So many AI projects fail. And what I wanted to start with was, what does failure look like? What are the causes of failure? This is a meta-analysis. In medicine, we love to look at the Cochrane Review meta-analysis of bad things. Failed AI projects have symptoms. The reasons that these projects fail are factors that were not taken into consideration when the project was born. And so keep hold of these factors in your mind, things like infrastructure, project management, know-how, and avoid falling into these many pitfalls. As you can see, there's not one or two, there's a big list. And so we got to be careful when we try and adopt artificial intelligence solutions in any of these various endeavors. So the first thing you want to do in any project, not just artificial intelligence, is know what you're trying to do. What is the key performance indicator you're trying to move? That might be reducing waiting hours, higher throughput of patients, less ringgit per procedure, whatever the factor is that you want to move, state the factor so that you know what it is you're trying to improve rather than doing something because it's cool. This is surprisingly the biggest mistake that people make in adopting artificial intelligence. They just adopt it without realizing, like, what is it for? What am I trying to accomplish? And so you want to think about your gap analysis that says, where am I and where do I want to be and where's that gap, as a bit of a science experiment. It's not engineering, it's science. You want to make some observations, ask some questions, and do the scientific process to iterate towards success. It's a little bit unusual compared to, let's say, drug development, which would be very slow. In artificial intelligence, you can iterate quickly if you do it in a deterministic way. So let's talk about these mental models that we can use for figuring out where to apply artificial intelligence. You can ignore the actual score numbers here, but think about these verticals, which are data. What data do you have? That would be patient records, like information you have. Then there's analysis, and that would be like what makes predictions. It could be people, it could be some kind of processes, it could be a spreadsheet. And then there's integration. You can think about that as like what is getting into use. That's not just in the skills lab, but that's in the clinic, getting into actual use in production. Across each of these vertical areas, you can think about how good am I at each of those. And then horizontally within each of those areas, these pillars, you can think about what are the policies and processes for each of these verticals. So in data, that would be, do I have a data retention policy? Do I have data versioning? Do I have role-based access control? In same thing in analysis and integration, you can think about what are the policies and processes to assess your maturity. The same thing happens for infrastructure. For data, that would be, do I have the storage infrastructure to store the data, to do electronic medical records, to store basically where are people in the hospital, where are machines, how are they used? Same thing with the analysis component. You can say, do I have GPUs? Can I run big machine learning models? And same thing in integration. Do I have the infrastructure to scale in the hospital or in the clinic, or do I only have that in the research lab? So you can think about also the last row there at the bottom is the human skills. In data, do I have a database administrator? In analysis, do I have data scientists and machine learning engineers who can do this kind of analysis? And then do I have people in a server farm managing the infrastructure to deploy something into production? This is like a very simple tool to try and figure out where to allocate resources. When someone in charge says, go get me AI, you have to think about, like, does that mean improving my policies? Or do I need to hire people? Do I need to upskill them? So this is a little bit of a tool to help you think about where to allocate resources. Once you know what your key performance indicators are, you still have to figure out where to shift resources to mature the organization. So when we talk about people, processes, and infrastructure from the previous slide, people as humans, they have roles, they're in their jobs. The processes are some kind of flows, and the infrastructure is servers, computers. And so these are very different mechanisms that all interact with your policies and procedures to together form the organization. So just for example, for infrastructure, you're going to have different copies. There's for development, there's for integration, there's for production. And so a lot of things have to happen in order to adopt an AI solution. What you don't want to do is spend a lot of resources on one thing. You want to do a little taste test, try something quick, pilot some ideas. You probably still need approval. So when you're doing a drug or device experiment early on, you get hospital ethics board approval to try something. And if they approve, then you do that thing. Maybe you write a case report. What you probably don't want to do is something very large and aggressive, because this is a risky science endeavor, not a straightforward engineering endeavor where things are for sure going to work. So you want to do lots of pilots to figure out where the value is. And again, there are mental models you can use to do this. The recommendation here is to start kind of at the bottom of the pyramid, where you do lots of capability assessment, looking at the readiness that we talked about. And then once you have a sense for like the art of the possible, you pick some use cases that you think will have some impact on your key performance indicators. And then finally, there's a much smaller subset of ideas on which you can try and prove the return on investment. That's what this ROI means. And then finally, you end up with a small amount of ideas that actually you spend the big bucks on to adopt and implement and scale out. It's very possible that in making the prototype, you just stop there and go, well, that didn't work. Or if it did work, you go, okay, this is good enough, I'm done. You don't necessarily have to make a large scale investment, especially if it's within your one clinic and you're happy with how it is and you just stop there. So assuming you do get to the top of the pyramid, you still need to make some decisions about, do I build, do I buy? So whatever the application is, there's a sequence of decisions that you need to make about, do I take something that works and customize it to what I'm doing? Do I make something brand new? Specific to Malaysia, AWS now has a Malaysia data center in which patient data can be stored, which is good. So you can get something called BAA, a broad area agreement, to store medical data either in the servers of the hospital or in some cloud provider that's allowed to do that in Malaysia. And that allows you to, for example, conduct clinical trials and store the data in a cloud server so that you can do multi-site trials. And so the backing infrastructure for adopting AI is mature in Malaysia. The necessary conditions are there, and as we'll see, there are other necessary conditions that are also lining up to make the case in Malaysia positive. So what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about what is this AI thing. There's different kinds of artificial intelligence. It's kind of a few fields that are kind of just duct taped together. It's really not one field, it's a whole bunch that kind of fell into a basket together at random. So it's useful. Again, we're not going to go into the deep details, but supervised learning is a model for making predictions. You have some kind of priors that could be patient records, it could be various observations that are paired with labels. And together, these like observations and labels make your data set. So what you want to do is learn some function that maps from your observations to your thing that you want to predict in the supervised learning paradigm. This is a simple approach to how to do machine learning and artificial intelligence, where you want to learn the function f and then use it for things that you didn't label to look at the factors and make a prediction. So that's supervised learning in a nutshell. You make a data set, you use the data set to fit a model, and you use the model. You now have automation. You don't have to make the labels yourself. It now makes the labels for you. So there's also something called semi-supervised learning, where you can take a large amount of unlabeled data, run it through your OK model, and then that will boost the model's performance. It's an interesting subset of machine learning, but this is all in the context that you're not just buying an off-the-shelf box, you're training something. You may be taking something that works and make it work better, but you're in the paradigm of making a machine learning model. You could decide, you know what, I'm going to buy a product, I'm going to install it. I don't want to make a custom machine learning model, in which case there might be a free model. You might be getting a subscription agreement to a model. There are different financial paradigms about how this works, but on the technical side, you've got supervised learning, semi-supervised learning. There's these different training regimes, ways of training these machine learning models. The idea is if you're making a custom model, probably you will have a data set. So there's also something called unsupervised learning, where you don't have labels. And what you do is take your set of observations that have no labels, run them through an algorithm, and what you're trying to do is find a function that just models the data. And what you get as a consequence is clustering or grouping that will tell you like what kind of things do I have in my basket, and also outlier anomaly detection, things that are weird. Now, diseases are weird. If you have a big data set of healthy people and some people are outliers, maybe they have a pituitary tumor, so they're super tall. So you can get detection of something strange, if you think about blood work, you could look at a large set of blood work and go, which people have strange blood work? I should look at them and see what's going on with them. It's an example. And so this is unsupervised learning. Another classic technique in machine learning is reinforcement learning. So your self-driving car, your game-playing agent, that's this kind of machine learning. It's relatively rare, but it's important in robotics. And in medicine, we see a lot of robotics. Think surgical robot, think like cleaning robot that just cleans the floor in the hospital. So these systems have to be able to navigate the world and plan, and they're trained through experience in the world to learn how to do their job. So good to know that reinforcement learning exists. These different paradigms are the first level of knowing what direction to go in. So we're, of course, going to talk about large language models, very, very popular ChatGPT type models. It's good for you to know, though, that these models are not just the general models. There are also specialist medical models that are trained on a lot of medical lingo. So in the same way as French and English and Spanish are all languages, but they're not the same language, medicine has a very big set of its own lingo to do with labs, to do with procedures. Some of it is because of shorthand, some of it is because of specialization. But what we find in general is that the most recent models, and I've given a link here to like very recent model assessments, the general models are actually doing pretty well. So GPT-4o, which is a American-based AI model, you probably can't call for like data exfiltration reasons, but its performance on benchmarks, on medical benchmarks, are quite good. So it's good for you to know, first of all, there are medical benchmarks for large language models, and they assess how good is this AI text model or AI image model at doing regular things that a human would do. You can see that we're kind of in the 80 to 90% range. I would take that with a big grain of salt. Even if you take this 80% for medical LLM and add this 4% for GPT-4o, which puts you at like 90%, you can't go see a doctor that's 90% good. That doctor will kill you. So the idea is that this is a medical assistance type machinery. We're not going to dig deeply into like how do the large language models work and how to like train them or adjust them, but it's good for you to know they exist. And if we have time, we can do a quick demo. This is a bit of software that we'll discuss a little bit later in this presentation that's for having tough conversations about palliative care, end-of-life care, that kind of thing. Better to practice on a chatbot in a skills lab than, test on humans. Typically, medical students will, first they'll try with their teacher and then they'll try on each other. But if it's 2 a.m. and you have some time and you're a medical student, why not try on the computer? Do a little skills lab type thing. So these machines can be helpful in surprising places. So now that we looked a little bit at what are the paradigms of machine learning, we have to think about like, what do we have inside our organization to adopt artificial intelligence? There's, again, a mental model here to think about, which is if you have bad data going into your AI box, bad data will come back out. The moniker is garbage in, garbage out. And so you want to think about if you're trying to do a machine learning application, they call it the 5 V's: volume, variety, velocity, veracity, and value. Volume is how much number of records do you have? And you might be surprised. In some cases, 4,000 records is more than enough. In some cases, 4,000 records is insufficient. And so when you think big numbers, you might need to think big numbers, and you don't know until you try, but at least you should quantify in your mental model, how much data do I have? That could be how many patient records, how many surgical outcomes, what's my number of labeled examples, or in unsupervised data, just how many records do I have? Variety, you have to think to yourself, like, what is the type of data here? In a medical record, it's typically just text, but you might have DICOM scans. There might be other aspects to these records. You want to be explicit about what the variety is of that data. Also, you want to know how fast it's happening. So you might have very high throughput data, or it might be like 1 record per year. Don't know. But write it down, and that will help you make an assessment about, is my data, in quotations, good? There's also the veracity question. If you had a hypothesis that you wrote into a medical chart, what if that gets fed into the machine and it thinks the patient has that diagnosis? If you were just thinking out loud by writing it down, uh-oh, does the machine not understand that you were not serious? So a human would look at it and go, oh, there's a question mark at the end of the sentence. You were just curious. You don't know for sure. Whereas the machine might look at it and go like, oh, it says they have this diagnosis now. So you want to think about also the value. Is the record that you have useful for the problem you're trying to solve? If you put in a bunch of hypotheses, maybe you just get out a bunch of hypotheses. You have to ask the question, like, do I have good enough data in terms of its value to produce something that I can use to get a return on investment for training an artificial intelligence model? So having talked about data set quality, we have to talk about data itself. So artificial intelligence is doing a magic card trick. It's very impressive from the outside, but from the inside, it's a correlation machine. And so what I want you to do is look at the data that you're looking at and start to develop hypotheses about this data. I'm going to tell you there's a little problem with this data. 100% of the data you're looking at is random numbers. This is an Excel spreadsheet with fully random numbers turned into different graphs. And this is the problem. If you train an artificial intelligence model on this data, it's going to go, oh, blue is more common and red goes up and down. It's going to make all sorts of theories like blue decreases over time. It's all made up. It's all random numbers. And so if you use artificial intelligence inappropriately without the right validations, it will say something because you forced it to say something, but it will maybe be like fully wrong. And so we have to be careful about the power of randomness. You can trick yourself. So let's talk about a few ways where you can unfortunately trick yourself. You've probably been exposed to this in just regular medical training about, logic and faulty logic. If we have a natural disaster and we have volunteers and some amount of damage, having a natural disaster is highly correlated with how many volunteers show up and highly correlated with how much damage the storm does. The problem is the AI machine may conclude damage is caused by volunteering because when I see volunteers go up, I see damage go up. And so these like third variable problems where the thing that's driving the effect is not even in your data set is a classic problem in many different fields. In machine learning, it's a problem too. So we need to think about the limitations of what artificial intelligence can do for us. Before things go wrong, we need to know what it is that we're modeling, and we need to be a little bit careful here. This is one of my favorite graphics of all time. This is basically all the data points you're looking at have the same mean and standard deviation on 2 dimensions and the same correlation factor. This team at this company made an algorithm where you can carefully move the dots a little bit to maintain the mean and standard deviation in both dimensions. And so if you rely only on statistics, you realize that like the data shape, the way that the correlations work are all the cases, including a dinosaur. Like anything is possible in the underlying data. Therefore, you can't rely on the t-test and standard statistics. You have to look at the data. And so what this example is telling you is machine learning can model things, but if you don't understand what it's modeling, if you didn't look at the data, you're in trouble. So the takeaway message is look at the data, because you'll see things that the artificial intelligence machine will not see. So there are many other science problems that emerge in training artificial intelligence models. And again, this is in the subset of the universe where you're training a model to do some new capability. Extrapolation is a big problem. This is the classic wives per unit time goes up over time. If you just extrapolate, boy, you end up with a lot of wives. Yeah, so we have to think about the limits of extrapolation. And in general, in forecasting, we're using a data set. We need to make sure that we train on the past and predict the future. You don't want to train on the future and predict the past. It happens. People do it by accident. Don't do that. There are many of these confounds. For example, uncertainty grows with time. It's a lot easier to predict what will happen tomorrow than what will happen 10 years from now. And so even if we train on the past and predict on the future, it's harder to predict farther in the future than it is to predict nearer term. You also have problems of picking the wrong paradigm. So survival analysis has this assumption called the proportional hazards assumption. It could be that you violate the proportional hazards assumption in your real world situation. So you may assume, for example, that like all patients have the same toxin exposure, but one of them lives next to a plant that's spewing toxins and the other one doesn't. They don't have proportional hazards, and so we can't use one model to assess both of them as if they're, a general sample of the population. People are not averages, people are people. We also have this problem of confidence intervals. In artificial intelligence, somehow everyone missed high school math and forgot that you have to predict with some error bars. Typical artificial intelligence models will just pick a number. They won't say plus or minus anything, they just pick a number. So, for example, if you're doing classification and you say patient has disease, you want error bars on that prediction. You don't want to say yes or no. You want to say 90% confidence interval something. And so if we take a machine learning student and put them into the medical field, they maybe don't understand the requirements of that field. So there's also bias in data sets. It's very classic in the medical field that studies are done on all males, and then that model is applied to females. At least be aware that you're doing it. You may find that the distribution for the thing that we're observing, whether it's diseases or outcomes, will be different across genders, across heights, across blood type, don't know. But there's a lot of bias, especially in small data sets, even in big data sets, but it's something we need to be aware of when we're training models. So in order to be aware of what's happening in these models, there's some really powerful tools. The example I'm going to give you here is, this is a husky, it's a dog, and the AI model says, oh, it's a wolf. And there's this system that lets you figure out what pixels was the machine learning model looking at to predict what animal is this. And it turns out it's looking at the snow. And it says, wolves live by snow. I'm not looking at the dog at all. I'm looking at the snow. And so, as we'll see in a second, this will happen in medicine big time. What you want to happen, the positive outcome, is you give it a picture of a meerkat and it looks at the pixels of the face and it goes, ah, meerkat. Or you give it this picture of a bird and it looks at the beak, and this machine is saying, what pixels tell me that this is the thing? So this is a way of understanding, interpreting what the AI model is doing. We want to, the quote is trust but verify. We want to check what's going on inside this model before we just use it, because it may be, like with the dog versus wolf example, doing something bad. Let's look at something bad. So in this trust but verify example, one example, and I've given some references here in the literature. One example is this quote: "We noted that the algorithm appeared more likely to interpret images with rulers as malignant." What was happening? The AI model was looking at these skin tumors, and when it detected that there were markers applied by the oncologist, the model went, "Oh, markers probably means malignant cancer," but that's super stupid. The markers have nothing to do with if it's cancer or not. It's cheating, and so these models love to cheat. If they can find some confounding signal, they will. They will always cheat. Similarly, example number 2, time of day. As you know, as physicians, when someone shows up at 2 a.m., they're probably really sick. Otherwise, you would see them in the morning. And so what happens? You train an AI model on medical charts, and it goes, oh, you showed up at 2 a.m., you're dying. But it turns out, if I'm a night owl and I just walked into the emerge at 2 a.m., there's nothing wrong with me. Go home. Don't let the AI model believe that like time of day is a strong indicator of there's something wrong with you. So we need to not just believe whatever these machine learning models say. We need to demand some kind of interpretability and go, how does this model work? What is it doing? Even for commercial software, you have to be skeptical and know what it's doing in order to give you its recommendation, not just believe its recommendation. Even with error bars, you want to check what it's doing. So there's also the kind of most obvious canonical example. Some things don't need an AI model. You could try to fit an AI model, or you could just say, vaccine's good. If not allergic, please get vaccine. Problem solved. You don't need a model to say, like, is it appropriate? Is it not? Just, if you can, get a vaccine. what I wanted to show you here is also when the effect sizes are very, very small. So the vertical axis here of survival probability goes from 0.994 to 1. This is a very strong zoom in showing the effect size of getting a vaccine. It's very, very hard to take advantage of these tiny effect sizes in a machine learning model because any prediction that it makes that's wrong would be a problem. Sometimes the easy answer is you don't need some fancy AI model. Just give people vaccines. If you can, if they can tolerate it, just do it. So the simple solution sometimes is much stronger than the big fancy AI solution. So now let's pivot a little bit into talking about various applications of AI. We talked about like what are the underlying mechanics, what are some of the pitfalls, some mental models for how to think about adopting artificial intelligence, but let's be a little bit more tangible. We'll look at various clinical areas where it can be adopted. So radiology is a very common place to adopt artificial intelligence, and that's because we have lots of images and corresponding labels, which were the diagnosis for that image. We're getting even better now in artificial intelligence at not just saying what is a diagnosis, but what was the basis of a diagnosis? What were the areas of the MRI or CT or X-ray that contained the signal, like which pixels were involved in making the prediction that is the putative diagnosis. This is helpful because then the radiologist can look at the scan and go, I see that the machine is highlighting this area here. Let me investigate further. And so this is a nice place to apply artificial intelligence. You have labels, you have lots of data. This is a hard problem, though. I want to say, as someone who has worked on this type of data, it's very difficult because these scans are very high resolution. They're very, very big images. And the actual tumor is not that big on the image. And the difference between like benign and malignant, even for big sized tumors, is not so straightforward. For a human, they have a much better chance looking at a slide and staining it than as a machine learning model, which again just wants to cheat. That's looking for like, is there a ruler? Okay, it's cancer. So yeah, it's a hard problem, even with 4,000 or 5,000 samples, because there's a very, very strong distribution of healthy people in these data sets. You might have 4,000 patients, but like 5 of them, they all have tumors, but like 5 of them are the aggressive tumor, and the rest of them are something benign. There was a mass, it's not growing. They'll still probably take it out, but it's actually quite difficult to do this right. A little bit because the vasculature of every tumor is different. And so, yeah, big numbers are needed to get really good results. And a lot of tricks, a lot of machine learning tricks to highlight specific areas. So it's a tough problem. In pathology, we got lots of examples now where pathology is adopting artificial intelligence solutions to do the assessment of the slide. So the pathologist is the one that actually makes the slide, but then they stick it into a machine that makes the prediction. It can be done for like even screening, just high-level screening on these slices. It's pretty interesting. They put the slices in freezers. They keep a bunch of backups in case, a slide gets destroyed. There's, other slices that they could take from the tumor. It's a whole thing. But the idea that you should be aware of is that biopsy slide analysis and AI are best friends now. I think the idea is that there's just a lot of data. And so with a lot of data, you can train AI models to make predictions. And I've given 2 examples here for breast cancer, for gastric cancer, where they're doing screening, not necessarily even standalone diagnosis, just to assist in pathology to give an extra marker because people's lives depend on it. They want to be extra sure, and these machines are pretty strong. So there's some demonstration that these approaches work better, both in terms of the speed of turnaround for the test, but also the accuracy of the test, which is great. We want to have better tests. So in pharmacology and clinical trials for different new compounds, there's some very good work happening to run clinical trials using artificial intelligence to improve the number of things that are tried, to improve the study design. And so in general, what's happened is once you have data that's well organized, you can apply machine learning to do hypothesis testing to try lots of things. So you don't necessarily have to know what you're looking for. if you collect lots of data, you can basically run it through the big filter machine that tries lots of combinations to see what's happening. So a good example would be you just look at what medications people were on and what their outcomes were without trying to enroll them in a study. You can mine for correlations, and artificial intelligence doesn't get tired. It can read lots and lots of research papers to do hypothesis building and testing. So in pharmacology, that's a thing where you're trying to find new uses for current drugs that people happen to be on when they had some event happen, a stroke, a fall, something. And if you find that there's some utility, then that's a new indication. You can extend the patent. Yeah, so there's lots of work happening in that area because lots of money in that area. Emergency medicine. So my dad is actually an emergency medicine doctor. Later in his career, he moved into drug treatment and prevention, but this show is quite good, The Pit, recent show. And so artificial intelligence can be used in the Emerge for a variety of purposes, but the one that I'm going to talk to you about today is looking up procedures without hallucinations. There's a big problem in artificial intelligence with large language models that it makes stuff up. You can't live with that, especially when you're in a kind of quick diagnosis and treatment in the Emerge. And so what you want is something called cognitive search that will look up in some database of procedures what it thinks the correct procedure is, but it can't make up procedures and it can't misinterpret them. All it can do, it's like a very, very fancy Control F in a big document, but what it will do is look at 500 documents and find you the right line in the right procedure to apply to this particular case that's in front of you. And so automated triage is an interesting application of this AI technology, but it has to be applied in a way where you realize the limitations of the AI and mitigate them through design. And so this Snowshoe AI, which I've been involved in, is an example of that, where it can pull up information without hallucinations. So in surgery, it's a pretty common place to find artificial intelligence. Robots are fancy. They're very fun to play with. In a skills lab, you can try out in a virtual setting how these robots work. It's super fun, very expensive, but super fun. You can see immediately where the benefits of artificial intelligence are. You can do guided procedures without simply memorizing the steps, but by adjusting and also mitigating mistakes. If you have a trocar that you're going to punch a hole in someone for abdominal surgery, you could, if you're doing robotic surgery, realize, just like when a car is driving and there's a car in front and you're going too fast and the car goes, I'm going to hit that car, it puts up a message that goes, brake. In the same way, if you're shoving a trocar into a patient and you're doing it too hard, wouldn't it be great if there was that same thing that goes, no, don't do that, and prevents you, not blocks you, but at least, warns you you're about to do something silly. So if your hand moves unexpectedly, you can put a setting into these robotic surgery machines to not mimic your jittering hand. Cranial drill is another good one. You want to go through the skull, but not through the dura and like the brain. So there are mechanical ways to prevent doing that, but it's great to have as many ways as possible to avoid making a life-altering mistake. And so as a surgeon, it's great to have as many tools as possible. So yeah, these surgical things, I'm highlighting some of the cool ones, but there are also very boring ones. We worked on an application that was simply the surgeon does not want to get their hands dirty, so they point a laser at a surgical instrument and the robot picks it up. That's it. That's the whole thing, just to not have to touch stuff. So yeah, it's there are a lot of these different tools where artificial intelligence can be applied in a surgical setting. For ICU monitoring, there's a lot of AI applications, but what's pretty interesting here is the failure mode of these things is not what you would think. The ICU nurses, if something beeps too much, are going to be unhappy. And so we need to use metrics like precision and recall and F1 score to make sure that when the beeping happens, the beeping is right. Otherwise, there are too many things that go beep in the ICU and they stop being useful. they get turned off by the staff because they just beep too much because they're wrong all the time. And so being useful in the ICU as an AI-based tool necessarily means not just being good at predicting that something is happening, but also being good at not beeping when nothing's happening. So getting feedback from the essentially end client of the application is very important. So moving on to the hospital adoption of artificial intelligence, this is a very different setting where the hospital is trying to save as much money as possible. It's our typical horse example of, ideally we want a very fancy horse, but realistically we don't want to pay for it. And so now that we have electronic medical records, we want to save money and doctor time by doing things like, instead of a dictaphone and then a person who's a secretary typing things in, you have voice to text to do medical charting, and similar optimization that we'll look at. Particularly in Malaysia, we see that there's been broad scale adoption of electronic medical records, and that's an excellent prerequisite for having artificial intelligence solutions now that the electronic medical records exist. You can't train an AI on there is no data, and also you have standardization. So there are protocols for these electronic medical records that make it much, much more likely that if you develop a system in hospital A or clinic A, you can roll it out in hospital B or clinic B because they have the same kind of records. And so that's quite useful. You can imagine billing code recommendations. It's a big thing in the States, reimbursement, but similar thing in Malaysia that you could imagine looking at the text of an electronic medical record to predict what are the correct billing codes for that record, even just to check if there was a billing code error before submitting the billing. And so both in private practice and in the public system, this is useful once you have an electronic medical record to use AI to fix things. And again, we talked about, DICOM and these different standardized protocols for medical things are quite useful now that they've been adopted. And we see drops in patient wait time simply from making things digital. So that can be improved further from the hospital perspective. So I've got an example here from the literature. It's a recent example of applying artificial intelligence in radiology, but not to the radiology part, not to the procedure part, just to the workflow. So back in the day, there was a big whiteboard that would be like, where are all the machines and where are all the physicians to schedule procedures in radiology? Now we have like a digital board that says the same thing, but wouldn't it be great if instead of the chief nurse or whoever's doing the planning, doing it by hand, if there was like a AI model that would do collection of clinical history and indications, checking what's orderable, checking what's performable and who needs to be in on what days at what times, doing the scheduling, booking the patients in. So these are all like surrounding activities that you can have, like a patient portal, insurance portal, using electronic health records to get all the boring stuff done by the computer, just to make sure people are in the right place at the right time. In radiology, this is important because the machines are expensive. You want to make sure they have the highest utilization possible. And also, you don't want staff standing around. So planning staff and equipment is a very AI addressable thing. And if you think about what we're doing here, in hospital adoption in general, this is addressing low-risk activities. This is not doing a diagnosis. It's not a medical device. It's something to make stuff more efficient. But nobody's going to die because of this. So people might be late for their procedure, but from a regulatory perspective, this is great. The hospital's like, I got improved efficiency. This is good. So there are other places that have low risk where we can apply AI in like a outpatient setting, for example, for appointment scheduling. If you can book a hotel or a flight with AI, you can do the same thing for your outpatient appointment. It's reducing the job of client-facing, let's say, it would be nursing staff, which would be much better pointed at patients in the clinic than on the phone. And so this is a better use of their time. And it improves patient engagement to not have to take up people's time to reschedule an appointment, for example. It's very, very common. Patient calls up and says, I can't make it on Thursday. Can I come on Monday? If the computer can do that, no one wants to do that job. Let the computer do that job. So we talked previously about this like palliative care training program. It's a good example of you're not getting rid of the medical student training. What you're doing is facilitating extra training when the human resources are not available to do that extra training. So it's a nice low risk example where the conversations are super disturbing because you're telling someone, let's say in pediatric palliative care, sorry, your kid can't be cured. Here's how we're going to make them comfortable. I'm kind of bad at doing that conversation, but the doctors get really good at it. That's a thing that takes a lot out of you if you've got to have a person to do that. Doing it with the computer hopefully improves the skills of that person. So remote patient monitoring, other like patient-centered applications are pretty common. The one I'll point to here is wearable devices, think like Holter monitor, that do continuous monitoring, can be useful in like the AI perspective of doing the signal processing and detecting if there's a problem and calling the doctor. So yeah, there are a bunch of medical device applications in remote monitoring that used to be inpatient monitoring, and so everybody ends up happy. Another interesting example here is people who are outpatient for drug treatment. I know in Malaysia there's a lot of inpatient drug treatment, but if we can reduce the burden on the clinical staff, who are not necessarily doctors, they're either in the prison system or in the like patient care, but not a doctor. So if you can use an app like this, and this is a company that provides an app like this, it collects patient history, conversational style notes, it gives them answers to questions like kind of like WebMD. And this kind of chatbot reduces the pressure on the medical system to every minute be dealing with these patients that take a lot of effort and care. And from the physician perspective, like we talked about earlier, you can get treatment plan recommendations that are explainable, where it goes, this is the medical protocol that's recommended. These type of patients tend to have a lot of comorbidities, so they're not simple cases. And so yeah, as long as you can refer back to the medical guidelines, it's looking good. So another example here that we'll cover quickly is a cardiovascular disease predictor, saying yes disease, no disease. And so this is like a fully worked example of smart home monitoring for elderly patients for cardiovascular disease, fall detection. There's these different applications that are possible in outpatient settings. And as you can see here, there's like, data sets and model training. And so these are a little bit more advanced capabilities than the typical one you would know from the like late 2000s, the I've fallen and I can't get up, like the fall detector pin. These are, slightly better diagnostic capabilities over the past, 5 years. They're relatively new capabilities. So moving towards the end here, we've got the regulatory perspective, which is you don't want to accident your way into being covered by very aggressive medical regulations. And so something to think about here, if you're doing a diagnostic, that's a medical device. If you're making a therapy, that's also a medical device. Whereas the workflow automation tool's not a medical device. So the rules that you have to follow are many in the medical device world, especially if you're doing something that seems simple, like Apple has an atrial fibrillation watch. They had to get that approved. It was very, very expensive, but now it's done. So now we recently, in 2024 plus, have smartwatches that can check for atrial fibrillation. This is a brain stimulator that I helped to work on. Similar idea. Lots of clinical trials. This one's actually approved in Malaysia. And so software as a medical device from FDA perspective, from CE perspective, is a thing. And AI itself, there's an ISO standard called 42001 that can help to capture how the medical device works. So you want to capture what are the requirements of the solution. However, initially you want to be agile. In the beginning, when you're trying something out, you don't want to do the very burdensome and expensive approach of fully documenting and making compliant the thing that you're working on. Instead, you want to get hospital permission for a one-off thing, just to try before you make this big investment, because it has to be cost justified. So in AI, there are lots of failed projects that were very expensive and went nowhere. So important to put the money once you know it's going to work, or take the least risk in order to move forward. So the closing thought here is, in artificial intelligence adoption in the medical field, you want to find something that's strategy aligned, that like moves the key performance indicator that you're expecting to work on, something that's feasible, not something that will take an insane amount of money or time or effort, and something that's profitable in the sense that you can look in the mirror and go, I can see how this is going to save time, save money, that there is some clear profit objective. Of the various AI projects you could adopt, this sweet spot is where you want to hit. So thank you everyone for coming to say hi in this continuing medical education. And yeah, I'm happy to take your questions.
Right. Thank you so much for that comprehensive, jam-packed, very technical, but very nicely, eloquently put forward, Daniel. We'll move to questions now. Uh, uh, so the question goes like this. Hallucinations are scary, but clinical skills development sounds exciting. Is it possible to do that like a video game rather than an expensive model?
Um, I think what you're referring to is like kind of like in a skills lab, like having virtual practice. Um, And yes, hallucinations are scary. Be afraid. Like blind adoption of this technology is a really bad idea. So my 2 cents would be skeptical, be very careful, and do incremental rollout of whatever the technology is, and talk to experts, because the experts will know what these confounding variables are. And yeah, as far as like virtual practice, this is what a skills lab is. A human dummy is not a human. Like they have many poor characteristics, but the famous saying is, all models are wrong, some models are useful.
Nice. And the doctor goes on to ask, can you help build empathy with AI communication practice?
So yes, you can. You can adjust the characteristics of these models to make a general model into a custom model using examples of questions and answers. So yes, that's a possible thing to do with effort.
Right. In fact, I've heard some doctors actually say that AI models uh, come across as more empathetic than some of our doctors. Um, I'm not sure if there's a large scale evidence base on that, but I suppose human personality sometimes does get the better of us at times. And as you clearly pointed out, the AI models can be trained to be more empathetic. Next question goes like this. How can AI systems perpetuate or amplify existing healthcare disparities?
So their tendency is to amplify, not to correct disparities, but to make them worse. So if you remember how these AI models work, when they pick the next word to say, they're picking the most likely next word based on their training data. And if their training data was biased, the model will be biased. The problem with this, and what's really pernicious, humans tend to try and get better over time. AI models tend to try and make things the same over time. And so they lock in the bias and make it stay. Whereas humans, we progress, we improve over time. AI models want to live in the past. And so what we need to do is fix the training data, provide adjusting examples, they call this fine tuning, in order to remove these biases explicitly. It's not a solved problem. I would say like we need to be careful because this is not a solved problem.
Right. And what steps can be taken to minimize bias in AI?
So it's a big topic. Some AI models are quite simple in the sense that they're like a decision tree, and you can see, where the bias is, if it's picking gender as a factor, for example. Whereas some models, like large language models, they're very difficult to interpret. What was their prior? What was the distribution they were working on? So what I would say is, like, this is a partially solved problem. In some types of AI, this is like very well understood. And in the more recent large language model kind of AI, it's less clear.
Okay, thank you. And the next question goes like this, Daniel. What is the ethical or legal risk if the AI models are wrong in its diagnosis?
They're big. It's
Hmm.
bad. Don't do that. You don't, just like you don't want, you have the patients that canonical example would be they look up WebMD and then they come with all their symptoms. You don't want to do that in the new iteration of technology, which is ChatGPT, that people look up their symptoms and diagnose themselves. There, it's not a doctor, and the liability is with the physician to be competent, not to say ChatGPT told me so. Same thing holds for lawyers. The same thing holds for all professionals. It's not a smart machine. It's a magic trick. So we got to be careful.
Yeah, there's absolutely no coverage or no way out at this point in time to put the onus on the AI instead of the responsible physician.
Yep.
And the next question goes like, how important is it to retrain AI models on local data sets? Example, local population in Malaysia. Would it be a case of trying to reinvent the wheel?
I don't think it's reinventing the wheel. I think it is important. The local population, um, even within North America, can be very, very biased. And so there are race-based differences in health coverage. There are gender-based differences in who agreed to participate in a clinical trial. Um, and so I think in Malaysia, in adoption of AI technology, there always has to be an assessment to say, is this appropriate for the local population? For example, the burden of disease, the distribution may be different in the local population. And if the model was only trained on North America patients, it's probably wrong. So yeah, we have to, again, be careful to adjust these models to the realistic setting. And in our evaluation, never mind making them better, just assessing how good they are. If the testing data is on the local population, at least you'll know how well does it work in situ in the real deployment, not wherever it was designed and developed.
Right. And if I were to ask, looking ahead in the next 5 to 10 years from now, which AI capabilities do you foresee having the most significant positive impact on a day-to-day practice and scope of work for a primary care physician?
So I think in electronic medical records, the AI around that is going to be very powerful. Essentially, is an autocomplete function that has no medical liability. It's just recommending to you billing codes, recommending procedure notes. It's gonna save a lot of time, and that time can be used to see more patients and to provide better quality of care. So if there's one thing I would say that's going to be the killer application in medicine, it's going to be that. Hopefully not a killer application, but the key application is going to be, yeah, in the electronic medical records. It just affects too many things and is too ripe for innovation.
Absolutely. And with that, you've actually covered all the questions asked by our participants today. This is what we describe as cepat dan tepat, which means very efficient, quick and efficient, and everything is covered. Questions, the whole context of it. I cannot thank you enough. Daniel and Meenakshi are in Canada, and it's daytime there. It's 9 p.m. in Malaysia. You can see all the hearts and appreciation. That's how we like our participants to keep engaging us. Um, and in Malaysian words, it would be terima kasih, which is a big thank you from this end of the world. Um, and for those who are still here, a good 160 attendees, participants, thank you for your patience and getting updated on the AI knowledge, the AI bandwagon. Someone asked about a CPD point, which is required for our annual practicing certificate, Daniel, and attendees would be given that automatically upon registration and attending. So we have the list. You would get that. Looking ahead, on the 29th of May would be our second webinar uh, for this committee. So I look forward to all of you attending the next webinar from the AI in Healthcare and Digital Health Committee of the MMA. With that, I thank you, Daniel and Meenakshi, once again for updating us with all the relevant stuff. And to you doctors out there, thank you so much. And there's someone who has put it on the chat box. Thank you, Daniel, June, and Dr. Siva from Amrit PRI. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you. Good night. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.